Hello and welcome to Week 2, the Basic News Story and the Inverted Pyramid, Moorpark College Journalism MO2, Digital Media, Reporting and Writing. My name is Professor Kelsey Stewart. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is finding the focus of the story. Something that you have to ask yourself is, what's the story about? How are the readers or viewers affected by this story? How would you tell a story to a friend? This will help you start to draft out the format and the layout of your story. We like to use the term the inverted pyramid to describe the format of news stories. The reason is the bulk of the information is found up top. So we have the headline and lead paragraph that lists the key facts that make news important. We also have the body text that will include relevant details, facts, and quotations from our sources. In closing, we will have the company's key data and contact information if it's needed, or we will end with another option, such as a kicker quote or a solidifying fact. Key elements of the basic news story include the headline, lead, nut graph, quotes, attribution, background or contacts, and ending. The inverted pyramid is a basic news structure. We start off with the lead, which has the most important facts. They summarize the story. This is usually beginning with a what, who, or why, but not always. The next paragraph adds more background or details, including any of the 5 W's, who, what, when, where, or why, or how, that were not in the lead sentence. The next paragraph adds more facts and details, sometimes including a quote from someone involved in the event. This would also be a typical spot for an authority quote, which we will talk about in another lecture. The next paragraph adds more details and background of what happened and how it happened. We also add more details in a quote, more details in background, and then we will end with a kicker quote, more information on the company or event, or some sort of solidifying fact. It will not end with your own summary. Here are a few headline tips. Headline usually follows the feature photo, so it will often be descriptive of whatever the feature photo is, but not always. All right, so now we have some headline tips. Headlines are honestly one of the most important parts of your story. A headline usually follows the feature photo. The feature photo is what you're going to see when you are looking at news. So say you're streaming it on your phone or your iPad or your computer, whatever you're looking at, and usually your phone, you're going to see the photo and then you're going to see the headline. So what you ideally want to shoot for is a character length of 16 to 20 words. That's your max, okay? If you're drafting into a tweet, they have 240 characters. That's about 55 words. If you want to add in like the lead to your headline, that would be kind of ideal in kind of strategizing, oh, you know what, I have this great quote up top, so I'm going to add in a shorter headline and then use part of this quote. Depending on what the story is, what the beat is, what the type of story it is it breaking news? Is it a fluff piece? What are you doing? That'll depend on your headline. Also, you want to add in the fact that majority of readers are skimming news. They are skimming strictly by the feature photo and about max 6 words of your headline. It doesn't have to be the first 6 words, but ideally they're looking for 6 words that are going to draw in their attention. So if they are following COVID cases, they are going to look at California tops 200,000 COVID positive tests or something like that in the first part of the headline. That is what is going to draw their attention, because they're skimming the news. They're going to look for either breaking news, something that they're following, or just something that they're interested in. So you want to make sure that you grab your audience. When we talk about grabbing our audience, it's great to start off in that drafting stage of SEO strategies. Avoid words like think and feel. Avoid past tense. Keep it present. It just happened. It's an active story. These words the verbs that you're going to use are action. It is like, they cannot miss this. It is your equivalent of word usage should be symbolism of exclamation marks. This is just news, read all about it kind of thing. Okay, so those are headlines. Headlines are going to grab them in. We're going to hopefully have an ideal feature photo that is action, that is showing that, hey, we weren't just there, as it was happening. We were there before it happened. We have the photos, we have the information, we have the interviews. Read our story. Okay? A nut graph is the sentence or paragraph that states the focus. It is the main point. Think in a nutshell. It is typically directly after the lead, often includes the lead. An attribution is sourcing where you got your information from. It gives credibility and authority to the journalist. Sourcing where you got your information from, either a source/informant that you will quote with a title or through alternative research like studies and public records, sets the reader up with an understanding that you are not bringing information to the article that you have not researched yourself, that you have not brought backup to. Use direct quotes. You want to quote someone when they have something important, informative, or unique to say. Is the quote interesting? Does it give information that you could not have used in a paraphrase? Does it give information that you did not find on your own common knowledge? Can it back up the lead? Does it restate what you have already shown that is the issue or the focus or theme of your article? Quote memorable. Does it make an impact to your readers? These are options of when you want to use your quotes. When you don't want to use direct quotes is when it completely parrots the lead, as in it mimics word for word, or it suggests the same exact kind of tone and language. If the source is boring and lengthy and factual, then that would be a quote that you want to paraphrase, which we'll talk about in another lecture. If the quote is not clearly worded or there seems to be some translation issues, then you probably want to save that quote for a paraphrase or follow up with another source. If the quote is accusatory from politicians or from witnesses of a crime, you don't want to use that as a direct quote either. And obviously, if your quote does not relate to your story, then it's not applicable as a direct quote. Quote structure is unique for journalism students. On the inside, we like to call the periods and commas are tucked in tight. So if you will notice, we have a comma and then the quotation marks, and then we will list whoever said it. Each speaker also gets their own paragraph. So every time that you introduce a source, you will give an extra space for another word or sentence, however you're going to phrase your story. You don't over-attribute. Once is enough in the same graph. So if a source is continuing to talk, you can source their name and then say he said or she said, but it has to make sense. If you are switching between sources, it can get confusing. Quote tips. You try not to interrupt thought with attributions. Do not continually say, according to this study or according to that. You can always source at the very end of that paragraph within the statement. Or you can source in the beginning. It should flow. It depends on the information. It depends on the story. Transitions in news stories are magic. They make the news story relevant to the reader, interesting, and just engaging to read. Ellipses are not recommended in news stories. It shows either laziness or a lack of information. So they're not suggested when you're writing your article. The second reference of a source is important that you remember not to continually restate the first and last name. So the second time that you refer to a source in your story, you use the last name only. This also goes for doctors. If you introduce Dr. Kelsey Stewart, you will still reference me as Stewart said or Stewart noted in the next time that you bring me up in your story. However, quotes with a husband and wife with the same last name or family members with the same last name can get confusing. So we use their full name every time. Here's an example. We found that having kids creates uncontained lifelong chaos, Mike Stewart said on Parenting 4 Boys. Here's a transition. The Stewart family spends every weekend on the ball fields and is currently involved in 8 different sport teams between the boys. Transition, and here's a quote. There's never a dull moment, Kelsey Stewart said. Now, if You would probably follow Kelsey Stewart said, wife of Mike Stewart, just to give further clarity to the article, but it depends on the story's context. When you source a title, a person's title, before their name, you capitalize it. When you source a title after their name, you do it in lowercase letters. Think Police Chief Roy McDonald said, so Police Chief is uppercase. If you say McDonald, Police Chief of Sunnyvale, is going to be lowercase. The background and context is important. It provides backup to your story. So when you're writing that, you want to ask yourself, is this story a follow-up as it's building on previous news items like the coronavirus? If that is something that's ongoing in the news and your readers or viewers are expecting a continual update, then you are going to provide a brief background, about a paragraph, of what the coronavirus, where it originated, and then you're going to talk about just a brief context of it. If it's a running story, that means there's new developments approaching, and there's usually a parameter about it. So think of election coverage when your readers or viewers are expecting to see the results of that. They're going to see the results of the Iowa caucus. They're going to see the results of the presidential candidates. However that comes about, your readers or your viewers are using your news outlet in order to update them on something they know will have a conclusion of some point. The rule of thumb with background is to never assume that your reader knows anything prior to your coverage. Just as you start the second novel in a 3-book series, you always see the author will do a brief update. You can always expect to have a brief update in your news articles. You plan to include 1 to 2 paragraphs of background context depending on the story to catch the reader up. The ending will be dependent on the type of article you are writing. If you are using a kicker quote at the very end, that will depend on what type of sources you have, and if they have given you good quotes that kind of sum up the whole article. The kicker quote is a solid quote that wraps up the theme of the story. So think if you use your top quote or your authority quote, which will be whoever's in charge of the event or the crime scene or the fire. Who's ever in charge in your article will often be the one to give the kicker quote, but not always. It could be a reaction from whatever issue has been brought to light from one of your other sources. A kicker quote is a good and often very common way of ending an article, as it provides personality and then a sense of response from the community in whatever you are covering. For more information is a standard ending on coverage of an ongoing event or advances. So an advance would be a story that we would write before an event happened. So think of a story on an upcoming concert or a story on an upcoming football or sports game. That's where we would say, for more information, please visit here for a ticket purchase or call here. For more information is great. It's a good way to end because it keeps your readers or your viewers knowing that full coverage is coming. Reiterating the lead without repeating and without using any personal opinion. This is probably one of the toughest ones and actually most uncommon that you will see in newspaper articles. It just kind of depends on the context of the story. If you're covering, for instance, the State of the Union, giving a solid statement that is just facts and not opinions to conclude the State of the Union coverage would be incredibly difficult. But that kind of coverage might call for a kicker quote of some sort from a senator or House of Representatives. So you just need to kind of figure out what your story calls for, and that's how you will figure out how to end it. So there are a couple of mistakes that I see every semester with journalism MO2 students. One is the use of personal pronouns and opinions. When we write news articles, we do not use I, us, you, We do not talk from our own opinions, even if we're covering something we don't agree with the result of, or we don't agree with how it went, or we side with one side. We don't walk into a story with that idea. We walk into the story as a media, as a completely neutral partner in highlighting the issue, in with our words and with our research and with our ability to interview. Second is spacing format. So oftentimes I will see an essay style story, or I will see everything on one paragraph. Spacing format is huge, and I touched on it briefly when we talk about quotes, how every new source gets a new space, but every new thought or paragraph, which are not longer than about 2 or 3 sentences, gets a new space. If you have questions, type in any news publication and you will see the format. It's double space with short paragraphs. The last mistake that I often see is source information that is lacking. Oftentimes, there won't be a first or a second, a last name, or they will forget to mention, if we're covering campus activities, they'll forget to mention the student's major or their year in school or age, which aren't all needed in every single quote, but at least throughout the article. When you're covering a community event, you will need the source's first and last name, oftentimes their age and their hometown. So if you're covering something in Ventura County, you would need to state if they're from Moorpark or Thousand Oaks or West, whichever area they are in. Okay, that's it. Thank you for tuning in to week 2's lecture, and I look forward to seeing you next week.